So here's what we offer at the Evolutionary Astrology Network. Everything from our free weekly audio podcasts to our new astral library to our multimedia course and pursuing certification if you care to do so. This is more details on our astral library. This was a very spontaneous and yet wonderful creation as our website wanted to recreate itself this year. We have put together hundreds of hours of audio and video files, lectures, workshops that we've had with our work together with evolutionary astrologers over the last decade. So you can subscribe for a month, you can subscribe for 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly subscription on a recurring basis and cancel when you finally make it through all that information. Here's EAN's multimedia course, or 3 segments. Many of you have already heard that Kim Marie has just finished up teaching 10 years of monthly classes on segment 1. It's resulted in over 250 hours of audio files that are accessible with any course segment. And then, of course, starting the beginning of 2014, Kim Marie is going to switch over to teaching monthly classes on segment 2, that complicated subject of relationship astrology. We'll look at both familial and intimate relationship astrology, and we're going to do it in this new webinar format. So if you'd like to get started with your segment 2 materials, you can just go to our website and study to your heart's content. All right, Leroy, I'd like you to switch the screen over to Maurice now, and I'd like to give an introduction on Maurice a little bit more. I've known Maurice since the Astro 2000 conferences, Maurice, back in the late 90s that Jeffrey and Noel Till put on in the Denver area. I think you were just starting as an astrologer then, weren't you?
Well, I was starting as internationally. I was already practicing in Europe and Israel.
Okay.
So
well,
this was my first time here.
Okay, got it. Everyone, Maurice is just one of the most beautiful evolutionary astrologers out there. I love him for a soul and what he brings on the planet. He is just beautiful and gifted in his teachings. And it's an absolute pleasure for Leroy and I to offer him to you as a speaker this week. So Maurice, why don't you give us a little bit of that background of yours and tell us what you do and take it away with Chiron.
Wonderful, thank you. And I would just like to make a note that there will be some background noise. Many birds and frogs in this area, and it's starting to rain, and so you're going to feel that you are in the jungle with me. And it's going to be a part of the Chiron experience. So yes, I'm very excited to present this this topic because there's so much mystery about Chiron. There are obviously some already established ideas about the concept of the wounded healer and so forth, but I think there's more to understand, and I'm excited to present this topic. And my style is always to present material that I have direct experience with, so I'm really sharing here things that I have intimately researched. And of course, I've been influenced by people who did their own research, but I always bring my own direct experience into the subject. And indeed, Chiron is also part of a course that I'm teaching. It's called a complete course, and a new phase, a new cycle is beginning this has begun this summer, but you can join whenever you want. The material, it covers all that you can learn about in astrology, basically. So it begins with chart interpretation and goes into the outer planets. And those of you who are familiar with my style may find this interesting. It's built on 7 segments: practice and theory, and most of it is correspondence, and some of it is on location, usually in a retreat style format where we just go into a retreat and study for a week together and practice charts. Usually the on location is about practice. So you can go to my website and have more information about this. I think I'm very happy and proud to have new graduates coming this October and having new astrologers on the market, people who focus on the evolution of the soul. Then another little advertisement is a presentation I will be offering for the first time on this subject at the OPA retreat in Myrtle Beach next March, in March 2013. So OPA retreat consists of immersion tracks. So for 3 days you choose a track and you're just focusing on that subject. So it goes much deeper than shorter presentations. And the subject I'm presenting is the consciousness of children, which means understanding ourselves, what happened when we were kids, and then understanding the transition from soul to birth into a body, the early stages of incarnation, and obviously the rest of it, which is parenting and teenagers, all that has to do with the torments and the genius of kids. So if you're interested, you can also contact me and have more information. And like I said, there are 13 more tracks to choose from. So now Chiron, and I have put some charts on, but I would like to first of all, and I will go back to my previous slide if I can. Oops. About Chiron, what is interesting is, where to begin when you find a new body. Chiron has been categorized as a centaur, which is an interesting concept because it kind of doesn't belong to anything. It's not a comet, it's not an asteroid, it's half a comet and an asteroid. So when it emerged on the scene and the astronomers researched it, they were a little puzzled. And just like it's half horse, half human, it doesn't belong to any particular group, any particular species, and it's a species of its own. Chiron represents part of that um, outcast, maverick quality. And the interesting thing is that even though in the mythology there were other centaurs who just looked like Chiron, they were also half men, half horses, they were not conceived the same way. And so their behavior and their genes, their intelligence was very different. Most of the centaurs were uh, how, the way you would put it is very low consciousness. People who are vulgar, who, they like to drink and party all the time. Um, they were the bad crowd in a bar who would always bring trouble and cause concern. Whereas Chiron was exactly the opposite. Chiron, as a centaur, was very sophisticated, a great teacher, teacher of teachers, really. And so not only was he different in his appearance from most people, but even among those that he looked like, he was different from them by temperament and just general orientation. So it is really a unique individual. He stands out as one of its kind. And that's part of his power, and it's also part of his grief and difficulty. So Chiron was discovered in November 1977, um, and it's located between Uranus and Saturn. And once again, when we want to find out what are the qualities of a new body, we have to take into consideration all these circumstances. First of all, the name that's given, you know, supposedly it's random, but we understand there's a synchronicity about it. And so we research the mythology, and with Chiron, it's very, very accurate. He captures that myth, the celestial body, its influence is so deeply involved in that myth that it's scary how it works. And the other thing is to consider uh, its position, between Saturn and Uranus, and it has an elliptic orbit, which means it comes sometimes very close to Saturn and then very close to Uranus, which means also that its pace and speed varies. Um, it, Chiron can stay about 2 years in a sign, and then it can stay about 7 years in a sign, depending on where it's at. And usually it stays the longest in between Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. That's where it lingers the most. And then it stays a short amount of time in Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio, about 2 years only. The whole cycle of Chiron is about 50 years, 50 and a half. So, it stands there between after the midlife crisis and before the second Saturn return and the Uranus opposition and the Uranus return and so forth. So it's really an interesting position to also research. And you should have the handouts where all the information about Chiron's placement are described. And you can see what year it was where to have an overview, visual of that cycle. Any questions so far? Okay. So when we speak of the way Chiron was conceived, he's the son of Saturn, and Saturn, as a noble god, of course, he's raping everyone, uh, and he was very attracted to Chiron's mother, who was some kind of a, what do you call them? I forgot the term, but she was, in Saturn's entourage, and because she looked like a horse, Saturn transformed himself into a horse so he could mate with her. And of course, this led to this weird mutation where Chiron was born half horse, half human. And when he was born, he looked so weird, and so, like I said, his appearance was really different. His mother rejected him and didn't want to see him anymore. So emotionally, Chiron was very wounded, and as this special child born from rape and difficulty, he is also rejected by both his parents basically. However, given that he's the son of Saturn, the very, very important part of this is that he's born immortal. And Chiron's influence and in our chart has a lot to do with understanding what immortality is and then what mortality is about. So he goes about, growing up, adopted by other figures that teach him. I believe Apollo was his teacher, and basically he becomes a genius. Chiron captures really high knowledge, and the fact that it's between Uranus and Saturn, he in some ways captures the essence of Uranus and Saturn. And we all know that Uranus has genius and represents, the unique spark and the capacity to bring, something completely new into this dimension. So it's a breakthrough, bringing of new paradigms, and beyond that, Uranus is not just innovative and progressive. Uranus is also very refined and sophisticated. So Chiron is about that. It's the higher chakras. It's the higher thinking. It's not acting like a beast. He would never do what his father did to rape people or to behave in such a condescending and disrespectful way. He was a noble character. So he was always there to help and always there to teach, and he had answers. That's part of also the Saturn Uranian. It's a master. He was a master, and he had solutions for everything and everyone, and had both on a medical level and on a practical level. And he was an astrologer, one of the first, or if not the first astrologer. So bringing heaven on earth, really part of that Uranus Saturn is he was a conduit between the higher thinking and the capacity to integrate it into matter. So wherever you have your Chiron in your chart, that's part of the experience, is a place where there is incredible talent and incredible knowledge. So this is where your genius can shine and your mastery. So before you even go to wounds and whatnot, this is a location in your chart that is highlighted by formidable capacity. If it's in your first house, it brings the warrior, it brings the freedom fighter, it brings someone whose endurance and capacity will be a true gift. And if it's in the seventh house, then the capacity to dissolve differences and to bring people together, and to also be involved with partners or communities or people that really inspire you tremendously. It can be this great marriage. This Chiron in the seventh house can be, the most amazing partner in your life. Something that is out of the ordinary. It is the ultimate soulmate association. And it's not because Chiron is necessarily associated with relationship, but it just brings the best out of that placement. So think of the immortality, think of the genius, think of the highlights, and the one that brings solutions to everyone and everything. So once again, it brings an element of mastery, and I will say on some level it's almost perfect. It's hard to find a flaw where Chiron is located, and there, that's we know the story, and we know that um, someone flawless on one level is also, subject to a very, very dramatic development. So we see that, the rest of the story is not as glamorous, and yet beyond the suffering that he experiences, Chiron brings very important lessons for us. And so let's proceed and try to understand what exactly happens and why. So as he proceeds in his teaching, and brings light, brings beauty, brings higher consciousness into this dimension, he eventually finds himself caught in a battle. Not a political battle, but more of a scuffle. And he he's caught in an argument, and in the crossfires, one of the people throws an arrow that inadvertently hits Chiron in his foot, in his leg, and that's where a huge realization occurs, that not only is he wounded, and not only everybody's kind of upset about it, but he finds that he cannot cure that wound because the arrow was infected with a poison from Hydra, which is one of these kind of poison that is really incurable. So interestingly, we have this paradox of the healer that cannot heal himself. So he can heal everything. He has answers for everybody, but he cannot help himself. And he is tortured. Not He's tortured by two things. First of all, the actual pain, but also the fact that he realizes his own limitation. He realizes he cannot overcome this challenge, and so he faces his own limitation. He realizes he doesn't have all answers, and that's one of the most important chironic lessons. Is in your greatness, like as I described in that first phase of immortality, wherever you have Chiron, you have tremendous capacity, and you have higher knowledge, and you bring the light in that location. And yet, with all as you gather that, you also have high expectations, and at some point you realize that you don't have all answers. You realize that you are not as flawless, so to speak. So it is a tremendously humbling experience. And at first, if we speak of a first phase as I sent you on the handouts, the first phase is that phase of immortality, where everything goes well, according to plan. And this is a place in your chart where you will feel that even though no one understands you, Chiron was this outcast and rejected by his mother, and she couldn't see beyond the physical appearance. So you see that wherever we have Chiron, we may be misunderstood, we may do odd things and take risks and be different, but that's exactly our power. So in the first phase, we actually prove everyone wrong. Here we are. The ugly duck turns into a swan. That's Chiron. So in that first phase, I am the swan. I proved all the critics wrong. No, everyone told me I shouldn't do astrology, and now I'm a successful astrologer. So the joke's on you guys. And then the second phase is, oops, I got a little overconfident here. And I realized that even though I proved everybody wrong, I still have, things that are beyond me. And I have to, I take the blow. I'm suffering. And so Chiron here is in a terrible, terrible dilemma, because nothing works, and suffering continues. And we all know he's immortal. So we all know that this suffering will be forever, if indeed he doesn't find any cure. So in that third phase, once the wound is happening and I'm realizing my limitation, in that wherever we have that house, we can experience some kind of extreme disappointment, or a physical wound, or just something that overpowers us and is taking us to a place where we are hurt on a physical, spiritual, or emotional level. And even if we manage to patch things up and to somehow feel better, there is a scar. Chiron works with a scar, because it is a wound that never goes away. It is like an amputation of an organ, or a limb, where once you cut your hand, you can't just regrow another hand. It's gone forever. And there's something about the wound of Chiron that is irreversible, and that's part of the process. It's like aging. Once you get to a certain point where you lose your vitality, or you lose some capacity, it's almost impossible to reverse the clock. So there's something about a chironic experience that is an indelible, it's not repairable wound. You can do with that. It doesn't mean you're agonizing all the time, but you realize that either there's a big scar, or there is a constant discomfort, or there is a limitation that you have to live with now for the rest of your life. And some people experience this in very dramatic ways. I will give you an example of a chironic figure. I don't know if you remember, about 6 months ago on Valentine's Day, um, this fellow Oscar Pistorius, he's a South African athlete who was born without legs. He ended up killing his girlfriend. So that's a very chironic figure. He's born with Chiron in Gemini. How is that for someone without legs? So Chiron in Gemini cannot walk. You see how this wound is irreparable. Like I said, it's not an amputation because he was born with uh, with a problem. It was not an amputation, but he is handicapped. He has a limitation, and yet he becomes this athlete that breaks records. He has, fake legs, and he manages to overcome his his handicap, and that's very chironic because he becomes a genius. He becomes a maverick. He is this ugly duck, you know, disformed child that becomes a magnificent champion and defies the odds, wins the battle. So that's a chironic story. And in Gemini, as we say, it has to do with mobility, it has to do with um, movement and learning and and definitely, you know, walking is in limbs are a Gemini thing. So he defies this, but he's still, he doesn't have real legs. These are fake legs. So the wound is not fully repaired. He never went back to normal. It's just that he managed to do well with his handicap, and he managed to take his handicap to a place of success. Difference, it's a different story. The scars are still there. And then, in another twist, if we move into phase two of the Chiron story, he ends up in a emotionally disturbed. With all the success, he is an angry person, obviously, and he ends up murdering murdering his girlfriend last Valentine's Day in a very terrible scene where she locks herself in the bathroom and he shoots her through the door. Very dramatic downfall. So it's not just the fact that somebody commits homicide and domestic violence, but it's the big hero that does it. So what happens is that we see someone who was on the Olympus, someone who seemed to defy time and space, and who seemed to defy all handicaps, who was above it, who seemed, untouchable because he was so gifted. He commits this terrible, terrible crime, and we realize how not only does he wound someone, but he's wounded emotionally. He was jealous and possessive and tried to control his girlfriend to the point of killing her. So we realize the downfall of that glorious personality. And that's part of the chironic experience, is that you realize that there's a shadow. You realize that with all the beauty and the sophistication and the capacity, there is something there that's not fully um, repairable. Now, I have seen, a few cases of people with Chiron in Gemini who could not walk or had a limp, and it's so graphic. It is so interesting to see that. Once we move into the third phase, it's a phase where you are in between, where you realize, well, I'm bleeding, I'm hurting, and how could this happen to me? I'm Mr. Successful. I, you know, I should be able to be on top of this. So there is, as you face your handicap and as you face your humble, your humbling experience, there's a there's a part of you that wants to compensate for the trauma, for the wound, for the crippling aspect. So if you have, for example, Chiron in the first house or in the eighth house, you can be this warrior and you can be this powerful person, but something happens and you become impotent. Sexually you can't perform anymore. Chiron in the first house, you lose your potency, or in the eighth house, sexual inadequacy. And so, how could this happen to me, Mr. Popular and Mr. Charismatic and Mr. Macho? And so what happens is, where the wound is, you want to compensate. And so you may overdo it. You may try to reclaim your dominion, your genius, your strength, your potency. And one of the ways to do that is to overdo whatever that placement is, or you can also be around people that reflect what you feel you're missing. So the Chiron in Aries, will be around very, strong people, strong characters, warrior types, competitive people who are successful. And Chiron in the eighth house, will be around people who capture this magnetism and who are wealthy and feel that they can overcome any crisis. And Chiron in Gemini will be around professors and very knowledgeable people. So there's some kind of an attempt to regain power by association, by associating with those who are comfortable there. So my wound is somehow nourished by the environment that I create. But it doesn't make a difference. I still have to face my handicap. And we come to the reason why. Why is this fate? Why do people have to suffer forever? And why do we have handicap and scars that we cannot completely heal, and suffering and limitation cannot be overcome? Because when we move to the fourth phase, that's when Chiron realizes that it's okay. I can accept my limitation. I can accept that I'm not perfect. And when I accept that I'm not perfect, in an immediate sense, symbolically, that's when Chiron decides to die and decides to trade his immortality for mortality, because he realizes, well, immortality doesn't serve me. What's good in living forever if I'm not having a quality of life, so to speak, if I can't do what I'm good at. So he decides to die, and this is not a suicide. It's not just quitting. It's more about accepting that you're not a god. You're not invincible. You don't have all answers. So in some ways, the noble quality of Chiron is accepting the downgrade. It's accepting that he is not a god, that he doesn't belong there, obviously, because if he were a god, he would be able to heal himself. That's how it works. What makes a god? A god is above time and space. A God is above um, suffering. You know, a God is a figure that is able to transcend um, limitations. And so when Chiron faces his own limitation, he realized that even though he was among the gods, he didn't really fit in there. And so that's the greatness of Chiron, and that's where his character is really showing, its true color, is that he's not only smart, but now we see that he's humble, and we see that he accepts a so-called downgrade because he knows it's appropriate. He knows that that's going to fix things, and so he trades place with Prometheus, who was punished by the gods for stealing fire. So that's a whole other story. But the whole issue is that he dies, and when he dies, he is in a way immortalized as a star figure. So he is in the constellation, and he, is remembered. He is honored. He is his energy remains. So he is immortalized as a myth, and that's where we move from phase 4 to phase 5. When we accept our mortality, we accept that we're not gods, and we don't try to, overdo it. That's where we find peace. So Chiron, the big lesson of Chiron is to find to find peace in death. And I'm again reiterating the fact that it doesn't mean that I'm committing suicide to escape the challenge, but it's about accepting that I am immortal, and that as a mortal, I have to understand that my resources will be exhausted at some point. I have to face the finite quality of my own existence. And you realize Chiron is between Uranus and Saturn. So we see the greatness of the greatness of Uranus, the genius, the solution finder, the maverick. And then we realize now that Chiron is, in accepting mortality, is now making peace with Saturn. So from Uranus we go back to Saturn. And Saturn is mortality. Saturn is time and space. Saturn is finite limits. And Saturn is true mastery on that level. So we realize that the mastery of Chiron needs to embrace both the symbiosis between Saturn and Uranus. And if we bring the heaven, Uranus is the heavens, to Earth, we need to accept time and space. We need to accept our own death. We need to accept that we are mortals. And that's why the wound of Chiron is not fully repairable, because it reminds us when we look at our scars, it reminds us that we could die, that we can hurt, and that we're not above it all. So it is a humbling process. And once we are humbled, once we accept death, life is good. We go back to doing what we're good at. So Chiron continues, to be a teacher, to inspire people, to bring a lot of light into everything that he touches. The only difference is now that he understands he's vulnerable. He understands he himself, as a teacher, needs to learn more things. He's not above it all. So it corrects, the whole process here corrects this tendency to take things for granted and to think that, we figure things out and we're above it. And this is where we go back to our Chiron positions. Wherever we have our Chiron, we are conflicted between magnificence and being crippled. So we experience both extreme of amazing success and complete humiliation. And we have to live with that dichotomy. We have to live with the extremes of wound and glamour, greatness and nothingness. And it can drive people crazy, especially in this second and third phase, where the wound is activated and the person is just freaking out and has an existential crisis where they don't know, how could this happen to me? You know? And yet, once we make peace with that, that's what the mortality, we accept mortality to start living. That's part of my statement there with Chiron, is to accept mortality to begin living. Once you are at peace with your limitation, life returns to be, a great experience. You're not, because you have less expectations. And so we're going to go through the houses and see how this unfolds. But I wanted to ask the audience if anyone has questions.
Maurice, no questions on the board right now, but if you'd like to take a little breather and get yourself a glass of water or something, I could launch the first poll and kind of engage the audience a little bit. Would you like me to do that?
Sure.
All right.
Let's 5 minutes?
Let's just make it a couple minutes. 2 or 3 minutes should be all this poll would take.
Okay.
So we'll see you in a few minutes, Maurice. Take a little break.
Thanks.
So for everybody else on the call, let's just get your charts out, of course. Where does your natal Chiron reside? Is it in an air sign, a water sign, an earth sign, a fire sign? As Maurice prepares for his journey around the houses of the zodiac with Chiron. Penetrating talk in a lot of ways. I mean, it is, as you ponder and look at your own charts, as Kim and I have been doing, it's like you can see where aspects Chiron makes to other planets in your chart, the effect that the potential for healing is tremendous. All right, about 85% of you have voted. And so we're about a minute in. I'm just going to go ahead and close the poll. And now we'll share some results with everyone. Hopefully you can see that on your screen. So most of us have Chiron in a water sign, and of course followed by an air sign and then a fire sign. And the laggard is the earth sign, so interesting to kind of ponder that energy with this archetype. I did want to remind everybody on the call, as Maurice refreshes himself, that the post-conference, post-webinar workshop with Kim Marie and Mark Jones is a separate event. So unless you have registered and paid for that event on the website, you will not, this current link will not, of course, gain entry into the post-webinar workshop. So most of you that by now that have registered should have received your distinct, unique link to enter the post-webinar workshop coming up at 1 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time with Mark Jones and Kim Marie on essential needs. So thank you for participating with that.
So I'm here.
Okay, Maurice, I'll turn it back over to you.
What was the poll question? Just curious. Leroy?
It was just simply asking the attendees where their natal Chiron resides. Was it in an air sign, a water sign, an earth sign, or a fire sign? And of course, that was all over the board. Earth sign was a laggard. Only 1 out of 10 on this call as an attendee had Chiron in an earth sign. So the other 3 signs were kind of split: air, water, and fire. So
what was the most?
A water sign, interestingly enough, at 35%, followed by air sign at 30%. Fire sign, 26% of the attendees had it in a fire sign, and then an earth sign was only 9% on the call.
Huh. It's interesting because obviously this is it's part of, obviously, whoever attends this call is random, but we have to consider that it spends the least time in Libra and Virgo, so these are earth and air.
Oh,
so I was wondering if this would play into this.
Well, it obviously did, because the earth sign was the least amount. Yeah, good point. Good point. And by the way, I have another poll question as you enter your second hour of the call today to Maurice. You can just kind of know a natural time to break for that second poll question and give you another opportunity to get a glass of water.
Okay. Well, I think. Do you need it or?
No. Nope. You can continue. Just an option.
Yeah, I think that we'll manage. We have a lot to cover.
Good deal.
So it's interesting to see your current position, and I want to emphasize, it sounds a little dramatic, but it's just part of the experience of Chiron, and it's something to learn, is that because Chiron relates to this aspect of mortality versus immortality, you have to understand that it's symbolic. What death means is simply that it reminds you you're not a god. It reminds you you are on an evolutionary path. If you were a god, you wouldn't need to learn all these lessons. You would be, in a place of mastery. So time and space, if we go through time and space, we go through motion. And as we go through motion, we go through change. So evolution is a factor of time and space. Evolution is a factor of imperfection. So death reflects imperfection. And obviously we all know that there's reincarnation and that the soul goes beyond the physical death. But still, the fact that you come to an end, that your existence comes to an end, as it is in this particular time and space, reminds you that you come to an end, that your resources are exhausted. And this is why Chiron can sometimes, in the chart by transit, actually represent death. So we think of Pluto, we think of, sometimes Mars or even Saturn as representing death, the end. Saturn is always the end, the finite. But Chiron kills. It sounds terrible, but and obviously it doesn't only do that, but you will see Chiron very present in death charts. And I can say for myself, I have an eighth house Mars, and 2, 3 years ago when my mother passed, and it was one of the most difficult losses because I didn't lose people, in the course of my life. Most people that I was with are still around. So she was a very, very significant person, and the first, a first experience of loss in such a way. And the day she passed, the most exact aspect, and I mean to the second, was Chiron on that eighth house Mars. So that's just one example. Um, and it, what does it do? It reminds me of my own mortality, of my family's mortality, and the fact that we're not going to live forever. It emphasizes this humbling quality that we're not invincible. So I would like to explore the house positions. And here I'm looking at, you know, the great warrior Nelson Mandela, who is born July 18th, 1918, 2:54 p.m. in South Africa. And guess what? His Chiron is in Aries and it's opposing Mars, square Pluto. And I think how could it be more graphic than Nelson Mandela for a Chironic figure and a Mars and a Aries Chiron? So he is a freedom fighter. He is fighting tremendous oppression, racism in his country, and basically abuse of force. And you see that, um, this Chironic quality, and it's in his fourth house, which has to do with, protecting his country, his motherland, and his people, protecting the black race, fighting for his home, his people. You see that he is now, remembered as one of the greatest freedom fighters. And that's part of the greatness of Chiron, wherever it is. It's tremendous strength, it's tremendous capacity. And yet that he was imprisoned and limited. So for 27 years, he lived isolated on an island in prison where he could not do much. And the scars of being imprisoned humbled him, because he realized, on the one hand, that he had a lot to lose, and if you read his story and his biography, being in prison changed him completely. It reprogrammed him and it humbled him. Before that, he was this warrior, but he was a womanizer. He had, a very difficult temper. There are some account that he was even violent in his domestic life. And so when he went to prison and all this freedom was taken from him to the extreme extent, and he faced basically a sense of impotence, a sense of absolute limitation. It it made him sick, and to this day, he has breathing problems. But it also gave him the wisdom of that non-violent, non-violent warrior, activist. And he managed the impossible. When apartheid, when the oppressive regime of racism was abolished in South Africa, he managed to walk through and unite blacks and whites without a bullet being shot and without a drop of blood being dropped. So, his nonviolent approach, his greatness, really unified nation, two parties that were um, completely divided, and you can imagine the resentment, you can imagine the rage after this liberation, and you can imagine that retaliation and vengeance was expected, and they were really, really afraid of stopping apartheid. Part of it was the fear of the consequences. And he basically brought this Chironic quality of walking the higher road, bringing that Uranian sophistication, transcendence in his path of change and transformation. But it had to go through um, years of incarceration and wounding to get there. Then the other thing I would like you to observe is you see the bi-wheel. The outer wheel is the time that he was elected president after the release. So he's the first black president of South Africa. And you see Chiron right on the MC in Virgo. So he rises as this Chironic figure, this hero, this magician. We call Chiron, it's a bit of a magician, this odd figure that can do wonders. And that's exactly what he did. And in a Virgo way, he brought order. He healed, the healer in Virgo, the restoring function, restoring order, and bringing sanity, health back to South Africa. But only a Chironic figure, can walk this crazy path, and it takes tremendous, tremendous humility to succeed. If he was not humble, if he hadn't gone through this phase of immortality and humbling process, the transit of Chiron would have, would have led to a downfall instead of a gaining status. So when we look at the position of Chiron, or by transit, we don't know exactly where the person is at. Are they still thinking they're above it all? Are they still arrogantly capable and geniuses? It's like the arrogant doctor or the arrogant scientist that is a genius but knows it very well and expects everybody to treat them special. Or are you in a phase of your wound where you experience Chiron in a debilitating way and you lose someone, or you face a humbling and humiliating experience? You don't know. Chiron is just a symbol. It has many layers, and astrology cannot tell you if the work is being done and where the person is at. So you can only speculate, in a figure like Mandela, you know that, he's someone who is aligned and who did a lot of inner work. He had time to purge Virgo, to purge his ego, and as a result, he managed to bring the higher frequency of Chiron, which is the fifth phase, where you are at peace with death, you are at peace with your wounds and with your imperfections, and you manage to just bring the best out of yourself in a very unpretentious way. So I think, he's a great example. And I just want to visit a little bit, Chiron in Aries. Think of it as, people who have tremendous endurance, who are fighters. People, what does it mean to be a fighter? Chiron in Aries, in the maverick phase, is someone who wins. It's a winner. So people who are born with Chiron in Aries have that memory, if it's a past life memory or if it's just an experience, where they know that with the right strategy, with the right effort, they will win the battles. And so they don't take defeat. And there's also a strength of capacity, creativity, and being able to walk their path alone. Chiron in Aries is I can do it. That's the phrase. I can do it, and I'll do it in a way that can surprise everybody else. When everybody thought I would fail, when everybody thought I was this ugly duck, I'll show that I have more than meets the eye. So strength, potency, charisma, victory, and capacity, creativity. When the person experiences the wound, immediately it can be a defeat, where they lose a job, where somebody, how to put it, wins the competition. So they gradually, through this shock, realize that they're not as omnipotent as they thought. So it creates this the loss of a battle. And sometimes it can be an illness. I'm losing the battle with this illness. I'm losing the battle for my custody for the children. I'm losing a battle at court. I'm losing, a battle for a position. Varies. It can, as I said, it can also occur on a physical level, on a sexual level, where you lose potency. Suddenly, you're tired, you're not as vital, and you realize your adrenals are completely off balance. So this, super potent person that was never ill, that won every battle, is suddenly crippled, bedridden, tired, not able to really do Aries, to do what they always could. And in extreme cases, it can create this castration complex, Chiron in Aries, where if it's a man, their manhood, their um, strength is diminished, humiliated. And in a woman, it's also her sense of freedom, her capacity to be um, powerful is undermined and crushed. But eventually, the humbling experience, is about accepting that I won't win every battle, but I can win many battles. The fact that I take a blow and that maybe I am not as potent doesn't make me a loser. It's not black and white. I'm not either winning everything or nothing or loser. And that's part of Chiron in Aries, the fear of being a loser. So that's just, another example. So there's a question. When you refer to Chiron in Aries, do you also refer to Chiron in the first house? I do, because I relate to positions from an archetypal point of view. So the archetype is Chiron in Aries, Chiron in the first house, and Chiron in aspects to Mars. So in this particular case, if we look at Mandela, he's a Chiron in Aries opposing Mars, and this is what we call a double signature. It's both Aries and Mars aspect. And that's true for all the other houses. So even though the house position is not always exactly the same as the sign position, as the way it manifests, it's still the same theme. It's the same elements, the same material that is chewed on. Great. So in the second house, Chiron relates to in this maverick phase, in the genius. Chiron in the second house can create this sense of beauty and the good life, so to speak. So people can be very beautiful and have many resources, feel like they have a comfortable life, and feel like they can buy anything, or they can enjoy the everything that life has to offer, all the flavors of life. And these are people who are extremely talented and resourceful. They have charisma, and they know how to make something out of nothing. They come here in this life with a lot of goodies, with the suitcases full of surprises and useful tools. So they feel rich, whether this measures in money, or it measures in talent, or it measures in insight. These Chiron in Taurus people feel very rich inside and outside. And as I said, have a life that is blessed with flavor, with taste, with meaning, with pleasure. And when they move through the second phase, one of the wounds of Chiron in Taurus can be financial, where they lose the money and the comfort, they lose the resources, and they suddenly realize they are not immortal. There is a bottom to that pit. The bank account can run dry, So there can be some reversal of fortune there, where from plenty, from abundance, they experience scarcity and in extreme cases, even poverty. In other ways, they can experience the wound of their body. Their body can betray them. The same body that was beautiful and sensual and potent is becoming a source of problems. It can be actually health issues, or it can be also sexual abuse, where the person realizes that their beauty is somehow turning against them, if you know what I mean. They become a magnet to negative influences. And so if we look at second chart here, Marlin, dear Marlin, who was born June 1st, 26, Marlene Monroe, 9:30 a.m. in Los Angeles. So she's a sex symbol, raised by foster parent, and this ugly duck, again, born rejected and orphaned, and yet she grows to be this beautiful swan, Chiron in Taurus, conjunct the MC, conjunct Venus. So she's not just beautiful, she is extremely beautiful. She's chironically beautiful, if you will. There's something about her that has enormous magnetism, and to this day she captures people's attention. For what? For her looks. She was not a great intellectual person. She even though she was a Gemini, and she was not, she was a nice enough actress. She did well, but what do we remember her for? This photo where the wind blows from the gutter there. So she's remembered for her looks, and obviously for her tragic mythological figure as well. So Chiron in Taurus here is really so graphic. And she plays the dumb blonde roles, and Some Like It Hot, and even her relationship with JFK, where she's just a mistress and he forgets about her after the one night stand. You see that the Chiron in Taurus there is severely wounded. On the one hand, she attracts the attention of the president, but then he dumps her. And that's the dichotomy of that Chiron in Taurus. On the one hand, I seduce the president. On the other hand, he trashes me. Where do I stand? What do I do with this Chironic dichotomy? Am I the most magnificent, or am I a nobody? And another example of Chiron in Taurus is what's her name, Paris Hilton, who again, Paris Hilton has Chiron in Taurus in the 5th house, and she's born to royalty. She's born to the Hilton dynasty, and she's beautiful, dumb blonde again, which doesn't have to be like that, but it can be. And guess what? She's paid like hundreds of thousands of dollars just to appear in places, to create publicity for a particular club. Just spending the night in a club, she makes $300,000. So that's part of the easy money. She's born into wealth, and from wealth she creates more wealth. But then what happens is that somebody humiliates her and releases a sex tape to the internet, and she's humiliated. Her Chiron in Taurus, her body becomes everybody's trash. She is trashed. She is humiliated. This easy life, seemingly untouchable person is humiliated publicly. And when this happens, Chiron by transit squares her Pluto. Another thing that happens is that she goes to prison for a DUI. And that happens when Chiron squares her Chiron. So she thought, well, Chiron in Taurus, I'm going to pay my way out of jail. No, she can't. She goes to jail. Eventually she's released, but she had to face the humiliation that she's not above the system. So you see the theme here. Chiron in Gemini or in the third house or with Mercury can bring amazing minds. People who are really sharp and that capture what life's about. They understand, they get it, and so people who come with tremendous knowledge and amazing understanding of things, they're great teachers. And there can be a whole thing about the intellect. For example, I had a client with Chiron in the third house, and she was born in a village, and she was, the smartest of her family. She always had the best grades and really the promising Chiron in the third house. Um, and of course, everybody in the village was stupid because, they're just plowing the fields and working in rural settings. So the mentality gap was very obvious. And she felt like nobody understood her because she was more advanced intellectually. And it's true, she was. In some ways she was more educated, she was more worldly, she was more of an urban city girl. And so that can be this Chiron in the third house is I'm smarter and I have knowledge and I know what to do. Gemini has a lot to do with navigation. So it's knowing where to take your life. The where is very Gemini, where to take your life. And indeed, she became a teacher. She was teaching sciences and was quite successful at it. But she was very bored. And interestingly, she wanted, to upgrade and to change career. She was tired of the school system. And she started to, study different modalities and different things. And she failed at certain tests that would accredit her for higher positions. So, she thought that she was so smart, and then from a Chiron point of view, she failed her tests and realized that she's not, you know, she's not as smart as she wanted to be. Another thing happened is that she had a daughter who was born with the same thing. Her daughter was born with Chiron in Gemini, and here you can see the interplay between house and sign. The mother is born with Chiron in the third, the daughter with Chiron in Gemini, and what happened is that second child with Chiron in Gemini was also the smartest, and she was really attached and in love with that daughter because she was so special, and she used to get people, and she had amazing psychic abilities, and she was a cool, she saw her as this cool girl. But at some point in her teenage years, the daughter developed mental illness. She became paranoid, severe mental dysfunction, bordering schizophrenia. And so think of that, Chiron in Gemini, and the smart, cool, popular kid becomes mentally imbalanced. So what a blow! What an experience of mortality! What a humbling experience! And luckily, they managed to work on it, and I won't get into the full extent of the story, but the daughter is doing much better today. However, permanent scarring. she's never back to normal. She can't hold a job forever. She's not as paranoid as she used to be. She doesn't have, the phobias and the psychotic behavior, but she is extremely insecure, and something was, forever altered there, and it may take years to rebalance fully. So that's very chironic in that
Maurice,
third phase. Yeah.
Leroy here, just doing the timekeeper thing. We're at about 90 minutes, so I just wanted to give you that cue. We got about 30 minutes left.
Okay. So you get the point again, and it doesn't always have to be so extreme, but when it is, it is. And again, on a positive way, on a positive level, uh, when she accepts, when the mother accepts the daughter for with her limitations, and the daughter accepts her situation, she went back to school and she's teaching now um, very unique methods. So she managed to take her Chiron to a place of healing. And here is another example of Chiron in Gemini with Dalai Lama, who has Chiron in the 12th house in Gemini, square Neptune. And he's a voice for the Tibetan people. And it's interesting, what's so striking about this chart is that on the one hand, the Chinese wanted to silence him. One of the things they wanted to do by persecuting the Tibetans was to keep them, uh, to keep the knowledge, to kill the knowledge, and to kill the tradition, to silence them. And he escaped, and now he's the voice. He's the chironic voice of this wounded tribe, wounded people. So it's very graphic. And he travels everywhere, and Buddhism has become this multicultural, it goes beyond the boundaries of his particular tribe. It's international, it's Gemini. Everyone, everywhere is exposed through the crisis, is exposed to that, to the knowledge. The knowledge has survived. Now, Chiron in Cancer, and I'm going to go a little quicker. Marlon Brando has he has Chiron in the 5th house, but by transit, Chiron was in Cancer, squaring his moon exactly. Excuse me. Squaring his moon exactly when his son shot the boyfriend of his daughter. So homicide at home. And Chiron is in the 8th house on his Pluto, square his sun moon. So you see here Chiron, domestic domestic crisis. And natally Chiron is in the 5th house of children. So you see that there's trouble with his kids. And I'm going to interplay here between the 5th and the 4th. So on the one hand, Marlon Brando is this, royalty in Hollywood. He's this magnificent, all very powerful, very charismatic, very talented figure. Chiron in Aries. He's also an activist. He's a big macho, and this sex symbol, like his sexual appetite is all over the board. I remember one thing he said was when he was asked if he ever had gay experiences, he answered, "I would do them a favor and have sex with men if they ask." So it's like, I'm God, if they are worth it, I can give them a piece of paradise. So it's this Chiron in the 5th house. It's the hero. And you see, though, that the wound comes with his children, and his children are completely wounded themselves, and they wound him. So there's murder at home, and the murder occurs when Chiron is on the Pluto square his moon. So you see how Chiron here brings death. And if we go back to just the moon aspect and the fourth house in Cancer aspect, quite often it's this extreme dichotomy of people with Chiron in Cancer can have a memory or a connection to powerful mother figures, the divine mother archetype, the immaculate, nourishing Mother Earth, Mother Sky, divine, nurturing, divine goddess. It is very close to the symbolism of goddess Chiron in Cancer, and at the same time, you will see that there's a contrast between being connected to the goddess and being emotionally starved. It could be that, my mother, who is amazing, is not able to nourish me. She's not available, or maybe she dies, or somebody hurts her. So, or another example, if someone who had Chiron in Cancer on his south node, and he was born, to a mother that was very dysfunctional. I mean, not very, but relatively dysfunctional. And so he was emotionally deprived. But his grandmother was amazing. And his grandmother, gave him everything that he didn't have with his own direct mother. So he was basically facing two different experiences with mother figures. The grandmother was the goddess, and his actual mother was the wound, and he was torn between both. So with Chiron in Cancer, you can have a memory of what it means to feel security, to feel safe in this world, and to develop, to have an amazing childhood where you develop with everything that you need. But when the wound occurs, suddenly the perfect family, the perfect mother can be tainted. There can be a crisis. It can be a divorce. There can be abuse, you name it. And here with Marlon Brando, you obviously see how the family is shattered by this event. Okay, so as we said, just reiterating, the fifth house reflects the hero, the king, and then the fall from grace, the loss of status. Moving into the sixth house, we go back to Nelson Mandela when he was elected with Chiron in Virgo. And remember that Chiron in Virgo is a very short transit. That's when it's about 2 years. And the experience here is capacity. Chiron in Virgo is, I can do anything. I can fix everything. I can be the most beautiful. I can have the perfect diet. I can be so healthy. So these are the healers. These are the coaches that will know what to do at every moment. They have solutions. They have their tools. Just call them when you have a problem. They will fix it. So it captures Chiron's quality, very powerfully. And So people with Chiron in Virgo have this in their mind that with enough work, if you work at it, you're gonna get it. If you put enough effort, you can conquer anything. You can fix everything. So there's this sense of confidence that their skills and knowledge and strength and investment is the magical combo that will, resolve problems and crises. And indeed, people with Chiron in Virgo can be super gifted. They are the magicians who will bring solutions when least expected. And on the other hand, they will also be, when the wound occurs with Chiron in Virgo, is, as we said, they can't heal themselves. There can be something about Chiron in Virgo or in the sixth house that reminds you that even though you're so good at what you do, you're not perfect. That's a very deep Chiron in Virgo experience, the imperfection. And this can be a physical imperfection, I have a big nose, or, something about my appearances is kind of different. It can be skills that I am so good at what I do, and yet I can't break through. There's something that doesn't make me capable of being in the Olympics. So what I'm saying here is that they face a crisis where they realize that the very motto that kept them, if with enough work I can do anything, is not true. They reach a point where there are certain things that doesn't matter how much they work at it, doesn't matter how much they sweat, doesn't matter how determined they are, won't work, won't succeed. And they have to let go. They have to just accept that it's not going to happen. So they realize they can't control it. They realize, it's beyond their capacity. And yet, when they accept that they're not able to heal everything or fix everything or succeed in everything, instead of feeling so bad about themselves, they will accept that they're very good, and that's good enough. So the combination, again, of a Saturn purging of the ego alignment and the Uranus genius. Genius is still there. Don't think it's gone. Chiron in the seventh house. This is another fifth house fellow. I'm going to talk about him later. Chiron in the seventh house can relate to, as we say, relationships. I touched on it briefly earlier on, where you can have this very special relationship. You can have, fall in love in the deepest way and find your perfect match. An individual with whom you have amazing chemistry. So it can represent this divine marriage. And at the same time, the Chiron moon can manifest in a reversal of fortune, where either the partner that it was so magnificent has a shadow, and you see that not everything is what it seems, or it could be that circumstances in life do not allow the relationship to be as smooth as expected. So, the partner can have a health crisis, or the partner can, even die, or there can be, suddenly difficulty in the marriage, and this perfect chemistry is in question. So something basically brings mortality, brings doubt to this seemingly perfect marriage. And the person has to accept that it's a work in progress. It's not immaculate. And when they do, then they can be in this relationship. They can maintain the same relationship, but with more humility and more, down to earth expectations. Accept the partner for. This is the thing when you realize your partner is immortal. They're not gods. And same to you. So Chiron in the eighth house. Sorry. Chiron in the eighth house relates to your sense of power, to the capacity to survive anything. You know, what is Scorpio about? Scorpio is about death. But the meaning of Scorpio in the eighth house is the ability to transform death. So in a way, Scorpios are constantly working on conquering death. They go down, they are down the precipice, but then last moment they rise again and they become stronger than they were before they went down. So this constant process of transformation is actually a process of cheating death, winning over death. You just thought you would get me, and then last moment I rise from the ashes and I'm reborn. Not when Chiron's there. When Chiron's there, there is no guarantee you will regenerate. But initially, Chiron in the eighth house can give that feeling that I can take anything. I have not 7 lives and not 9 lives. I have hundreds of lives. And you can kill me. I will come back again. I am invincible. I am unbeatable. I regenerate. I am this snake that will shed its skin and transform. So that's the original Chiron statement. I have the medicine to recreate nothing, something out of nothing. And yet, when Chiron's there, the experience of death can be, sharp and humbling, humiliating, where the person realizes that they can't beat death. And this example of Dominic Strauss-Kahn, whom you probably heard was in the news 2 years ago, this very prominent French politician, head of the IMF, had everything going for him. He was about to become president of France, and Chiron in the fifth house, the king. He was brilliant in wherever he touched. He was a great economist. Sun in Taurus there, with Chiron in the fifth, in Sag, bringing, abundance and solutions. When he came into the IMF, it was a mess. He restored it. He did a lot of professionally good things. But then, eighth house, sex. Eighth house, power. He is accused by an hotel maid that he raped her. And it's a huge scandal that not only discredits him for presidency, Chiron squares Chiron. Chiron squares Chiron. So he loses his position and the IMF. He loses the campaign for presidency. He is basically completely disempowered. Eighth house, loss of power, deflation. The invincible, the one that was above it all, is a rug. Is nothing. And not only that, once this story unfolds, then other accusers come forth, and we realize that this guy was a sex maniac, that he was cheating left and right, and that he was raping women, and that he ran a brothel, something very close to that in France. He was literally a pimp. And even though not everything was proven and whatnot, eighth house Chiron, the shadows came out. He thought he could keep the shadows under control, and they ended up controlling him. So this Chiron square from the eighth house to the fifth is what we call a very humbling experience. And now he's just trying to patch up everything, but he doesn't have the humility. He's not humble yet, and he can't come back. Chiron in the ninth house, we have this vision of greatness. Everything's possible. The sky is the limit. Chiron in the ninth house. I know the answers. I'm also a great teacher. And I know where the opportunity is. So higher knowledge, the shaman, the capacity to communicate between worlds, and the capacity also to create abundance, to have freedom, to it's very much the theme of the promised land, Sagittarius. Go to America, or buy a big house and do whatever you want. Be free. This whole sense of hope, of abundance, of greatness, of opportunity, and and also along with that, the knowledge, the truth, knowing the truth, honesty, integrity. So with Chiron in the ninth house, I can be this great teacher. And I can have a spiritual understanding of life. But many people with Chiron in the ninth house experience a trauma associated with belief systems when they realize that their teachers have a shadow, that their teachers are mortal. And those that seemingly know everything may not always practice what they preach. So there can be a huge dichotomy between having a great spiritual experience and then seeing that the priests are pedophiles. So on the one hand, the priest gave me this epiphany, and I feel like, wow, I know God now. And then the same priest is revealed to be abusing children. So there's this shock of being between the magnificence of Chiron and the shadow of Chiron, and not knowing what to do, where to go. Is this true? Is my life fake? Do I believe in something real? Were my epiphanies, were they authentic at all? And then the other thing is aiming at this greatness, buying something great and then realizing that this huge house that I bought, because Sagittarius in the ninth house has to do with size, with no boundaries, with openness. And I realized that the size is actually something that turns against me. It's too big. I can't pay for it. I can't clean it. The maintenance is outrageous. Or, I started the business, instead of starting small, I went too far ahead of myself. So this whole lack of measure and getting carried away with statements and with hopes. And then I realized, that this big dream is a nightmare. And, this is the experience here of you. I'm sure you remember this very difficult story. Elian Gonzalez, who is born with Chiron in the ninth house, conjunct the moon in Virgo. And he escaped with his mother and other people. He escaped Cuba on these makeshift boats. So the ninth house, the promise of America, the promise of a better life, the what's literally, on the horizon. I can see Miami. And he engages in this voyage when Chiron by transit and Pluto are square in Sagittarius. So it's a double signature. Sagittarius to ninth house, Chiron to Chiron, Pluto to Chiron. So you see here the death, Pluto. And, this odyssey, this voyage to freedom becomes a most incredible nightmare. And America, took his mother. He lost his mother, Chiron moon. So the voyage, she's lost in this voyage. And he's rescued, and there are many stories about what happened there with the dolphins and whatnot. But he's rescued, and his family is accepting him in Florida, and that also goes wrong when you remember the American authorities breaking into his house and pulling him out of his relatives' arms. So he's again Chiron moon. He was in the arms of his relatives, hiding in a closet. And you see this picture of the soldier, or whoever that was, coming with a huge gun into the closet and pulling him out. What a Chiron moon. What a Chiron ninth house experience. So he returns to Cuba, and he's reunited with his father. And in some ways, life is fine after that. I mean, I don't know exactly how he felt about it, but he seemed to be, doing well in Cuba. So this whole chironic experience and loss and the big hope of a voyage is suddenly humbled by returning to Cuba, returning to the motherland, and leading a more simple life, and doing good things there. It's not as glamorous. It's humbled. Again, he's humbled, but it's good. So that's a classic here. And Chiron in the 10th house relates to, obviously, authorities and the system. So people with Chiron in the 10th house can feel natural leaders. They can be gain authority, be recognized very easily, and they can be great leaders. They can be very reliable, and people follow them and listen to them, and there's a sense that, wow, this is a great teacher. This is a great CEO, this is a great president, this is someone who knows what they're doing. And the same thing with the system. You can be at first feeling like you are part of a great community until you lose credibility. And Chiron in the 10th house can be a difficulty when a person loses their position of authority. And suddenly, the leader is somewhat taken down their position. And they lose their credibility. So it can be that they do something that's not legal. It can be that people suddenly don't recognize them as leader anymore for one reason or another. So with Chiron in the 10th house, everything you built, everything you created, your whole legacy is suddenly dwarfed, tainted. It's like Madoff. I think Madoff had that, Chiron in the 10th house, where, building and doing and then suddenly realizing that he's a fraud and he loses everything. He loses his credibility. But if he accepts his shadows, and if he accepts that he's not God, then he can be a great leader still. Chiron in the 11th house and Aquarius is very interesting. It's obviously very going back to the Uranian quality of Chiron. And here the capacity to bring enlightenment, to bring progress, to bring new ideas. So it is, the scientist, it is the astrologer. And Chiron was, this very Aquarian figure that knew everything and was innovative, inventive. And so the wound that can occur with the 11th house is when you realize that progress and development and enlightenment is actually not as good as it promised. And if you remember, Chiron was in Aquarius in 2008-ish, 2009, when the whole crash, the economic crash occurred. And what do we remember for this period? It's a very Chironic time, where suddenly all these, the collapse of this supposedly fantastic, successful US economy was serving only, a portion of the society, serving only the elite. So the whole ideal of Aquarian fairness and social equality was just blown out of proportion. And Chiron was exactly conjunct Neptune in Aquarius during those years, and we can see how the disillusionment of social equality. So on the one hand, it's the progress and building and buying and industry. What did we gain from industry? What did we gain from science? What did we gain from progress? We gained global warming, pollution, and corrupt 1% a layer of society. So we suddenly see that this Aquarian American dream of enlightenment and freedom is a fraud. It's not as good as it was sold to us. And that's what can happen with Chiron in Aquarius. Is be careful if you're going a little too fast, and if you think that the future or something new is necessarily better. The new is not necessarily better, and the quicker and and more gadgets and everything that speeds up so fast can actually disconnect us from nature, authentic lives, well-being. So Chiron in Aquarius is understanding the true meaning of enlightenment, the true meaning of higher mind, and finding true solutions, not just, you know, anything that would patch up and give us immediate wealth or immediate solution, but high cost on the longer run. With Chiron in Aquarius, there's also a social aspect that needs to be considered. Friends, my best friends, my community, and there can be some kind of wound associated with friends and community. Accepting them as mortals, accepting that people are people. They can disappoint you. It doesn't mean they're bad. It's just that they're not perfect. And the next chart is Barack when he was first elected in 2008 during this crisis, with Chiron and Neptune right on his ascendant. And he is born with Chiron on the south node in Pisces. So he is a Chironic figure, such a Chironic figure. He's a maverick. He was this young guy, African American, the first one to be elected. He defied all the odds and came after Bush. After all these years of war and complete disillusionment. And then right after the collapse of the system, of the economic system in 2008. So Barack is born with Chiron on the south node in Pisces. And what is Pisces? He is the savior. He comes with, the capacity to bring salvation, to unite everyone, oneness, Pisces, to save the world from doom. Pisces, the whole time that Chiron is conjunct Neptune and Chiron is in Pisces, there's this sense that the world will end, that existence is not working. So initially, Chiron in Pisces captures this sense of me and God are one. God is my friend. I'm supported. Things will be fine. There are problems, but it's all good. That's Pisces. It's all good. And Chiron is Pisces is like, no worry, be happy. God's in charge and God is good and we're all sheltered under the blue sky. So it's an existential sense of security. And Chiron in Pisces can bring a lot of psychic capacity and ability to live life, very, very well, to be happy. It's happiness. Life works for me. God loves me. I have abundance. I have health. It's flowing. The river is flowing as it should. And then the Chironic wound is, uh-oh, maybe I'm not that happy. They're building a power plant right next to my paradise here in Hawaii. That's not nice. They're going to pollute the waters, kill the birds. Not happy about that. And then Chiron in Pisces is also suddenly, you're ill. Suddenly, it rains on you. Things happen. Life happens. And God doesn't save you. You are in it. So that feeling of suddenly the universe is not supporting me anymore can be traumatic. And so when we experience this Chiron Neptune and Chiron in Pisces currently, there's a constant sense of gloom, constant sense of doom. that it's not going to work. It's going to fall. God is going to crash this planet. So the wound is, it's a wonderful world, but it's doomed. We have amazing talent, but it's overpopulated. And then Barak comes in with his Chiron in Pisces and Chiron on the ascending in Aquarius. And he says, I have solutions, I have ideas. And he's elected as this maverick. And what happens during his first term? He doesn't manage to pull it off. He's controversial. The Tea Party is about to eat him up alive. And basically everything that he was promising came, let's say, halfway through. So the big invincible savior was revealed as a mortal. He's just a human being. But you realize the projection of that Chiron on his south node in Pisces. He was immortal. He was larger than life. And so his Chironic experience was suddenly facing failure and not being able to deliver the promises, at least not as quick as he wanted or as we wanted. And then, guess what? Second election, he is elected in 2012 on an exact Chiron return. Why? Because he did his work in some ways. If he hadn't done his work, he would have been defeated. Only, if he was not humbled, Chiron in Pisces would have taken him down. So right now, he still comes with solutions. He still comes with promises, but it's a little more humanized, if we may say. He's not the big savior, and everybody's more sober about him anymore. We're not having extraordinary expectations as we used to have. So he's just, he's downgraded from a god to a mortal, which is exactly what Chiron is about. And now that he's downgraded to mortal, okay, he can do his job, he can be president, and, things are going to go as they're going to go, fine. You understand? I hope you understand the symbolism of this.
Absolutely, Maurice.
And I hope you understand.
Mm-hmm. We might want to consider closing
I
here.
know we're wrapping. We are. We started a little late, so I'm stealing a few minutes.
Go ahead.
But basically, this is it. I hope this inspires you to keep researching. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, this is material that I teach in the course, in the complete course. There's a whole chapter on Chiron. So we take this material much deeper, and along with the Pluto and the Uranus and the Neptune and chart analysis. So if this inspires you, you have my email there, you have my website. Thank you all, and thank you, Kim and Leroy, for a wonderfully Aquarian webinar.
Absolutely. And I do have Chiron in Aquarius. So I appreciate not only this presentation, Maurice, as always, but, having been behind the video camera in about 3 or 4 of your your complete course segments of your school, it's always been a pleasure for me to watch your Gemini mind and your Gemini soul kind of search for the correct words as we're moving through hours of information. And I don't know if all of our listeners know this, but Maurice is fluent in about 4 or 5 different languages. And so it's always been a great experience for me to watch you work, to be a part of your work. And again, thank you so much for this fascinating perspective, as you said. And indeed it was for me and for all of us. And the various comments coming through. Thank you, Maurice. Thanks. Great presentation. Appreciate the effort, Maurice, et cetera, et cetera. And for now, we'll go ahead and stop the recording, and we will welcome you back at 1 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time for Mark Jones and Kim Marie in the post-conference webinar. Bye for now.